Hey folks, welcome back once again to Indaba Africa. This is Chris, and the topic of today's video is yet another hatchet job that appears in the once impressive but, as time passes, ever declining Mail and Guardian, South Africa's once leading newspaper, falling on even more desperate times, running fiction and fairy tales. Yet another hatchet job from Nick Turse, who seems to have an axe to grind with anything that has to do with reality in the world, particularly when it comes to defense. Let's talk a little bit about that story that appeared in the Mail and Guardian recently. So the best way for me to do justice to this is to read through it and pick out a few selected points, which I'll comment on here in this article. Now, this article talks about inside the secret world of U.S. commandos in Africa, alluding to Rambo and Hollywood movies, talking about nefarious activities of the U.S. military across the continent of Africa. What's interesting about this particular article in the Mail and Guardian, which just appeared there, is that virtually the entire same story was reported by Politico in July of 2018. And then again in February of 2019 in the Military Times by Kyle Remfer. So Wesley Morgan and then Kyle Remfer. Two stories which report virtually all of these purported facts in this story. Now, as usual, Nick Turse takes factual information, speaks to genuine people, and then weaves a story that defies imagination. And I'll make some of those points here. For instance, in his opening paragraph, he says that their operations are shrouded in mystery. Not really. Not really. He says that although U.S. commandos operate, I love the term commando, applying exclusively across the board the term commando, as if that actually applies. It does in some cases, but not in most cases here. Although U.S. commandos operate on the African continent with the agreement of host governments, ordinary Africans are rarely told about the full extent of U.S. activities, nor offered a say in how and why Americans operate in their countries. Yeah? What's your point? They're offered little say, have any voice in the operations of their own militaries. Why would they get a say in things that their militaries do with friends, partners, and allies? Americans have little knowledge of what the special forces who train at Fort Campbell and at Fort Bragg are doing on a daily basis. And they shouldn't have that information. Don't need to know about the tactics, techniques, and procedures the special forces employ in order to accomplish their missions with the least loss of life around the planet. It's just a ludicrous statement there. Why would Africans know what their military is doing unless their military chose to share that with the public? But a Mail and Guardian investigation can, for the first time, reveal where U.S. special operators have been active on the African continent and offer exclusive details. Exclusive? Hardly. As I'm about to tell you, the author himself discloses, the reason he knows this information is the U.S. Special Forces Africa and U.S. Africa Command have publicly disclosed the information on request. Not a state secret, ladies and gentlemen. And as I mentioned, you could read almost the exact same story in Politico in July of 2018 and then in Military Times in February 2019. Or quite frankly, you could have asked me. And I would have been happy to supply the information for you. Not exactly state secrets. In 2019, U.S. Special Operations Forces were deployed in 22 African countries. Well, it's true that there were U.S. forces who were Special Operations Forces located at one time or another in 22 countries in Africa, amongst the 54, should we mention. Deployed is hardly the correct term for the vast majority of those troops. TDY, or what we call temporary duty, is hardly a deployment. Going to a country to do an advise and assist mission for a week to 10 days is not quite a deployment, ladies and gentlemen. Ask any soldier, sailor, marine, or airman who's been deployed away from their family 3, 6, 9, 12 months or longer for combat, peacekeeping. That's a deployment. Not a mission where you stay in a hotel and you receive per diem for meals and your hotel is paid for. Not quite a deployment. He says that these 22 countries they deployed to account for 14% of U.S. commandos deployed overseas in 2019. Again, I take exception to the term commando. They're not commandos. Some are commandos. They're special operators. You can say that. That's true, special forces. But that's not synonymous with commandos. 14%. The largest percentage of any region in the world except the greater Middle East. Well, gee, I wonder why. The Middle East is embroiled in conflict. The U.S. has a large number of special operations forces still deployed to Afghanistan and had many in Iraq before that. And aside from that, so that explains why that would be the largest region. But why might Africa have 14%? Might it be that it's got 54 countries and it's one of the largest continents on the planet? Might that be why? Yeah, not to mention there are conflicts raging across Africa. Might that be why? Yes, it might be why. Now, as I said, Nick Turse gives full disclosure here, but he certainly doesn't build up to this. He says that these figures come from information provided to the Mail and Guardian by the U.S.'s Military Special Operations Command and Africa Command. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. State secrets, they're not. Publicly available information, freely supplied upon request by the U.S. Africa Command and U.S. Special Operations Command Africa. Hardly a state secret. Now, this is another thing I take exception to. The military footprint of the United States in Africa is extensive. This is ludicrous. Ludicrous. At the height of the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War, the United States had 287,000 active duty Army soldiers based in West Germany, 160,000 Air Force soldiers based there, 100,000 Department of Defense civilians. All in total, over 1 million Americans related to the Department of Defense, including family members and civilian employees. Nearly 500,000 soldiers, sailors, Marines. In West Germany alone, extensive footprint. The total number of troops in Africa at any given time doesn't exceed 8,000, with over half those troops typically based at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. And the rest of them either tied up in exercises, some in advise and assist missions. This is highly, highly misleading. And it's intentional. It's intentional. Footprint is extensive. Maybe it's because the number of countries are prolific in Africa, and it might explain why the footprint is extensive. Previous reporting, he's talking to something he also published himself, which I disputed and refuted and debunked in a video that I did earlier this year about his so-called military bases. Previous reporting has revealed the existence of a string of military bases across the continent. Formerly secret 2019 AFRICOM planning documents show that there are 29 bases located in 15 countries. Untrue. Sheer fiction. There is one U.S. military base in all of Africa that's located in Djibouti, has been there since 2002 in the aftermath of 9/11 when the Bush administration negotiated to use space at the international airport in Djibouti to base U.S. troops there to do counterterrorism operations and intelligence collection in the Arabian Gulf, in the Arabian Peninsula, in the Red Sea, in the Horn of Africa. Exactly. They put those troops there, and they've been there ever since. It predates the existence of U.S. African Command when it fell under Central Command and then became a subcomponent of the African Command. There are no other U.S. bases in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, a warehouse in Entebbe is not a base, particularly when it belongs to the Ugandan People's Defense Force. It's administered by the U.S. Embassy there. I know because I ran the warehouse. I had the keys. And the UPDF had access anytime they wanted it. They simply ask us and we let them in. Simple as that. Simple as that. It's not a base. A cooperative security location is not a base. An intermediate staging base is not a base. It's a plan. It's an agreement with the host nation that in case of contingency or disaster, that they will allow us to use certain facilities, which of course we pay for, or we exchange things in kind. So this myth about 29 bases. Now, of course, the next question you'll say is, but Wyatt, what about Niger? Yes, there's a air base in Niger that was built in Agadez for the FAN, Force Armée Nigérienne, the Nigerian Armed Forces, by the U.S. Air Force. It was expensive too, over $100 million. That base is currently operated, manned, and security provided, logistics provided, as well as the operation for the drones by the U.S. Air Force. But they will withdraw from that mission, and that base reverts to Nigerian control. Although I'm sure they're not in a hurry to get it back because it'll cost them about $16 million to keep it operational per year, money they don't have. So they're very happy to have the U.S. Air Force there as long as possible. More secretive still are the activities of U.S. special operators. Their presence in African countries is rarely publicly acknowledged. That's horse manure. Rarely publicly acknowledged, then why in the heck did I hold press conferences? And why did we do press releases? And why do we invite the media out to observe training taking place by special operators in Uganda and other countries when I was in Africa? Yes, there are classified operations, and yes, there are sensitive things, and there are advise and assist missions, but the number of those is small. This is simply distorting the truth here, giving the impression that we're operating in dozens of countries in combat operations, which is simply not true. Citizens are not told what these elite troops are doing on their land. No, and they're also not told what their host nation military is doing on their land. By the same token, this is a ludicrous point to make. In the United States, U.S. citizens don't know what our special operators are doing on their land, or soldiers for that matter, unless we disclose it as a consequence of sharing with the public. But generally speaking, when soldiers train every day, very few people know what they're doing. Not because they're state secrets, but because there's no need to know. The Mail and Guardian has spoken to a wide range of sources to fill in the blanks. Indeed, and where you didn't fill in the blanks, you made them up yourself. Yes, former U.S. military officers, diplomats. I don't recall having a conversation with Mr. Turse about any of this. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there happy to talk to him, though. But when I see whom he's talked to, who he actually mentions by name, not exactly particularly experienced people or people who have long experience on the continent. What emerges is a comprehensive picture of U.S. Special Forces activities in Africa. I disagree with that. Now, he gives the impression that he's discovered something unique here when he mentions the 127 ECHO programs that are in the Defense Appropriations Bill. Currently, the U.S. is conducting 2 127E programs, but he gives the impression that he's discovered some state secret. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a matter of public record. It's simply a matter of public record. You can look it up online and find out what this is in the defense bill. It's not classified. It mentions that these are that sets aside $100 million per year, up to $100 million per year, to allow special operations to conduct these activities. And it gives a host of activities listed, including intelligence operations, things like that. Not a state secret. The actual operations themselves are protected, but the program itself is identified to the public. It's a matter of public record. And it's not some shrouded in mystery. You simply need to do a Google search, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, I will leave the link so that you, the viewer, can go and look at this if you'd like. And you just see how lazy this story is. And he goes on to talk about U.S. commandos in Somalia. In fact, the U.S. has ramped up its participation in Somalia, much to my chagrin and much to my consternation. I disagree that we should be active there, but that's not my choice. That's for the leadership of the Pentagon to make that decision, along with the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. But I disagree with the ramping up of activity there and sucking us into activities there. Nonetheless, not my call. But he talks about there are more than 200 ground missions against al-Shabaab between June 2017 and June 2018. Finally, on the second page, halfway down, I find useful information. This is useful for the public to know. Thank you for that, Nick. I appreciate that. But then he goes on to mention some different folks, Chief Petty Officer and some others talking about these operations. He talks about Juniper Shield, which is not exactly a state secret, again, involving 11 nations in the Sahel. And then he talks about another key activity, Flintlock, Operation Flintlock, an annual special operations training exercise conducted by Special Operations Command Africa. That's correct. Not exactly a state secret. When I was assigned in Mauritania, we hosted it there that year, the Mauritanian forces. We held press conferences in French, Arabic, and English. Allied nations participated from Europe. A host of West Nation Africans participated, as they do each and every year. Chad, Niger, Mauritania, Mali. But not in that case, because Mali had just imploded, so Mali wasn't present for that particular one in 2013. Not exactly a state secret. Widely publicized. Videos made, photographs taken, journalists invited. Not exactly a new development. Been going on for a long time, long before we sent any advise and assist missions to the Sahel to help the Nigerians and the Malians defend themselves in the current conflict they're dealing with. Yes. Then it gets really interesting here. So this article is written up as Rambo and U.S. combat operators and special operators and how they have secret missions all over Africa. But then he talks about things like Flintlock, which are publicly disclosed in a matter of record and happily told to people. And it's an exercise. It doesn't have to be done by special operations. It's just done that way for continuity and for relationships. It could be done by any military unit. But then he goes on to Botswana. Botswana, ladies and gentlemen, talking about special operations and doesn't mention any special operations. In response to questions from Mail and Guardian, U.S. Embassy in Botswana said that elite U.S. troops participated in Exercise Upward Minuteman. Ladies and gentlemen, I worked at the embassy in Botswana. I was the senior military official, senior defense official in Botswana as a lieutenant colonel. I seriously doubt that anyone in Botswana said elite U.S. troops. We're talking about North Carolina National Guard. And I've looked online. It's a matter of record. There's all kinds of pages. There's the Flikr page on this. There's a video on YouTube on this that the North Carolina National Guard produced with footage of what happened there. And most of the footage you see is the Botswana Defense Force doing things with an advisory role by Americans. This is cobbling together things that are completely unrelated. This has nothing to do with special forces. 3-week training event held in June of 2019 at Tebe, Botswana. Yep. 200 National Guardsmen from the North Carolina National Guard. Not exactly a state secret. You didn't need to contact the U.S. Embassy in Botswana to find out about this. You simply could have done a Google search once you heard the term exercise upward Minuteman. Very disappointing, ladies and gentlemen. I'll continue here. I know we're getting long in this video, but I'll continue. So then he disparages the Botswana Defense Force, saying that Botswana's armed forces enjoy a relatively clean reputation. Relatively clean? That's nonsense. The Botswana Defense Force enjoys an outstanding reputation in all that it does. Anti-poaching operations, counterterrorism operations, peacekeeping deployments to Somalia, to Lesotho on 2 occasions for Operation Boleas in the 1990s, for putting out forest fires in the men's sector for HIV, preventing and treating HIV. Outstanding reputation. Outstanding. How dare you write such nonsense, relatively clean, as if to give the impression that they're not entirely clean. This is shameful. Then he quotes Temi Ibrogaba, a program research associate with the Africa Program for the Center for International Policy, who says that if the most powerful democratic nation in the world is supporting your military, you'll surely believe that human rights violations you committed are excusable. That's what she says. Well, that's reprehensible. And that's a fraudulent conclusion. And I'll give you an example of why it's a fraudulent conclusion to make that assertion. First off, I worked all over the continent in many of these countries. And we refused training for forces that didn't comply with human rights. We denied assistance to the Ugandan military chieftaincy because they had past human rights abuses. And that was only lifted after several years by the State Department and the Department of Defense while I was in Uganda. And then they finally started offering some training to them. But for years they didn't get it because of the human rights record. And I can give a more recent case. Nigerian defense forces have been angry at the United States Department of Defense for several years because we would not participate in their decision to purchase Super Tucano aircraft. Now, Super Tucano is built by a Brazilian firm. They could have gone to Brazil and bought these aircraft at any time, but they didn't want that. They wanted to buy them through the Foreign Military Sales Program so that the U.S. government, U.S. military, would be the purchaser and the deliverer of the aircraft for them. Well, the only way for that to happen is for a U.S. manufacturer to make them under a license in the States, and that's what's happened. So the Super Tucano is being assembled and manufactured here in the United States under license by American firms. The Sierra Nevada Corporation, if I'm not mistaken. Those aircraft are being developed here. They're being trained by U.S. Air Force personnel who are familiar with the aircraft because it's also been fielded to the Afghan forces. So we have a training wing that's responsible for that here in the U.S., training foreign pilots, and they're training the Nigerians. But this only took place after 7 years of consternation and hand-wringing because Nigeria was denied this by the Department of Defense and Department of State and Congress because of human rights abuses by the Nigerian military. So this is pure nonsense. If the most powerful democratic nation in the world is supporting your military, you'll surely believe the human rights violations you've committed are excusable. I disagree. That's simply fraudulent. Now, does that mean that all these partners we deal with don't have human rights abuses? No, of course not. That sort of thing takes place all over the place. Look what's happening in Minneapolis. Look what's happening in Portland and Seattle, in our own country, where law enforcement fails to adhere to the rule of law and allow people to suffer human rights abuses. Andy Duhan, a captain, a former U.S. Special Operations officer, is quoted in the article saying in the Sahel region, he said he questioned the effect of the U.S. military's involvement in Africa. He said the U.S. does not understand what African countries want and as a result is unsure how to best intervene. Well, that's Captain Duhan's opinion. And I'll tell you that my well-considered opinion for 3 decades of Africa experience, having served in 8 countries in Africa, rebuilt the armed forces of Liberia, and many, many other activities across the continent, including counterterrorism, peacekeeping, human rights, professional military education, HIV, Ebola programs across the continent, my considered opinion is quite the opposite. In fact, we often know exactly what foreign countries want, even when they can't articulate it. The fact that Captain Duhan didn't know doesn't mean the U.S. government doesn't know. And he doesn't speak for the U.S. government, nor do I. I speak from my personal experience, my considered experience, having followed Africa since 1979, 1980 as a young man, having been paid for it as an officer in uniform since 1995, and having served 8 tours across the continent of Africa. That's my considered opinion. We do know oftentimes. But knowing what African countries want doesn't equal the result that you desire. It can, but it doesn't. I disagree. So he finds someone who suits his needs to say the U.S. is clueless about Africa. I disagree. Does that mean the Africa Command gets it right all the time? Absolutely not. Comfort Ero, with the International Crisis Group's Africa Program, International Crisis Group's Africa Program Director, said the extent of U.S. Special Operations Forces in Africa illustrates the creeping buildup of the U.S. military on the continent. Again, I have to disagree in this case with Comfort Ero. Creeping buildup? No. We had 25,000 troops in Somalia, in one country, in 1992. 25,000 troops. We've had decades of military troops deployed to Africa as far back as the Second World War. And even before that with the Territorial Defense Force, the Frontier Force in Liberia, with American military officers advising and assisting the creation of a defense force in Liberia at the turn of the 20th century. Yeah, a long history, ladies and gentlemen, a long, long history. This is just nonsense. Creeping buildup. No. Not a creeping buildup. Disagree. Ero said that the lack of transparency from the U.S. and African governments on U.S.'s military presence in Africa is a cause for concern, as their apparent willingness to work with authoritarian governments. Which authoritarian governments are you referring to, Ero? Which authoritarian governments? Please, tell me which ones. Chad? Agreed. Who else? None mentioned in the article. None mentioned. Just a broad statement. You want to mention them, then we can debate it. But you just throw something out there that's ludicrous. There's 54 African countries we're talking about here. Which of them are you talking about? And the military president of Africa calls concern is their apparent unwillingness to work with, their lack of transparency. Lack of transparency. What lack of transparency? Nick Turse, through great efforts, struggled so hard to get this information. He asked the African Command and U.S. Special Forces Africa for the information, and they gave it to him. I did a Google search, and I can find all the information you'd like to know about the Operation Upward Minuteman that he was talking about in Botswana. People making Flikr accounts, photographs of the exercise, a video, a press release. Secrets? Hardly. Hardly secrets. Ladies and gentlemen, this is yet another hit job, an effort to undermine the safety and security of service members abroad, putting them in danger with nonsense and tarnishing the reputation of the United States, our friends, partners, and allies in Africa. Now, you'll notice in this video I didn't say the U.S. is not involved in combat operations in Africa. Not directly, but I didn't address that. You also notice that I didn't deny that there are U.S. troops in Africa. There are always U.S. troops in Africa. When he's talking about creep, we were doing this under European Command before African Command existed and under Central Command. Been doing this for decades. We had U.S. troops in the Congo. We had a U.S. military airlift command base in the Congo back in the day during the Cold War. We had thousands of U.S. troops in Liberia during the Second World War. And of course, famously in North Africa with Operation Torch, we had a lot of U.S. troops in Africa. So this is yet another effort to pretend that someone's discovered something fantastic, which isn't fantastic. You got a question about this? Ask me a question. I'll be happy to answer it. What's most disturbing is seeing things like in the article, if you go, and I'll leave the link to this article on the Mail and Guardian, you'll see this map, a footprint of U.S. Special Forces in Africa, with no timeline, simply a colored map where the green countries says there's a U.S. Special Forces presence. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if a Special Forces non-commissioned officer is assigned to work in an embassy in a security cooperation office, that would qualify as a presence. But that's not a deployment. That's an assignment in an embassy. If a U.S. Special Forces team is the one that's the provider for a training event that takes place in Africa or courses that our Africans, friends, partners, and allies ask for, and they're provided by Special Operations Forces, then those are Special Operations Forces in Africa. Not deployed, but on a short-term visit. That's right. Anyway, it gets really old disputing these things, but it's necessary. As I've mentioned before, Nick Turse did the same thing with this story about 29 military bases in Africa. We don't have 29 military bases, and we don't have this creep that's being discussed here, as well as a host of other things, this Rambo attempt to make it look like the U.S. military has run rampant across the continent of Africa. This nonsense that in 2017 people suddenly discovered that we had combat troops in Africa because Special Forces operators were killed in an operation in Niger is utter nonsense. Simply look at the public unclassified testimony before Congress when the commander of AFRICOM testified before the Senate the year before. And in that testimony, which is a matter of public record, you can download off the internet, you will see Niger was discussed, and it was mentioned that special operations forces are there because Congress allocated the money for that operation, and they were informed of the operation in an unclassified setting, which any not lazy journalist would have been aware of. That's a fact, ladies and gentlemen. So it gets quite irritating to see this constant nonsense. And to be fair, it's not just the journalist. Senator John McCain famously said, well, I didn't know about that. But sir, you were present in the meeting the year before in which it was discussed. And earlier that year when it was discussed again. You chose not to know, or you chose to lie, as do many politicians when it's politically convenient. This is not some great expose. It's simply a compilation of factual information presented in an unflattering light to achieve a purpose. And shame on the Mail and Guardian for this behavior. Shame on them for publishing this again. If you want the real deal, if you want the real story, then talk to me. Or allow me to have ink in your newspaper so I can publish the true story about what's happening with U.S. Special Operations Forces, U.S. military personnel, and partners, or our activities with our friends, partners, and allies across Africa. Folks, if you found this video to be interesting, although somewhat long for one of my prepared videos, nearly a half an hour, if you found it interesting and you're not a subscriber, I ask you to take a moment to become a subscriber by smashing that subscription button right down there. And be sure to toggle the bell icon so that you get notified of all updates about my prepared videos, my live streams, and my special features, as well as interviews. If you want to leave a comment, I'm happy to listen to your comments, and I'll respond to those that are appropriate. And finally, I ask that you smash the like button because likes drive viewership. While Nick Turse has gotten a free platform on the Mail and Guardian, which a couple 100,000 people will read his article, even though it's nonsense, I don't know how many people will see this video, but not nearly as many. So feel free to share this with folks and smash that like button. Thank you for your time, for your patronage, and for your listening to my video.